Last week we talked about the first and the second of the Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth is suffering. The second Noble Truth is the causes of suffering. Now we'll discuss the third Noble Truth, the cessation of suffering. Just to repeat again, the fourth Noble Truth is the path to cease suffering. So there's four Noble Truths. Suffering, recognition of suffering. Life is suffering. Second is causes of the suffering. Find out why we are suffering. Third is cessation of suffering, which is affirmation that such suffering can be ended. The fourth is path to cease suffering. What are the methods? Are there any methods to stop this suffering? So you can see this is like a diagnosis of a sickness. The first one is you got to recognize it. This is the world of suffering. If you don't even know this is a world of suffering, there's no way out. If you don't even know your problems, the problems of life, there's no way out. You have to realize the problem, identify the problem. So suffering, we know that. The second Noble Truth is causes for the suffering, origination of the suffering. Why? Where do the sufferings come from? And the third is cessation of it. That means we can end it. Fourth is, what are the methods involved ending it? So we know that suffering is due to craving. We already mentioned that last week. Craving. Craving is a general term covering desires and the grasping to desires, or the attachment to desires. So craving produces mental afflictions in the mind. Mental afflictions, which I would give you more information about. We already have talked about the variety of mental afflictions in the mind. Why do we crave? Why do we desire? Why do we attach to desires? We crave because we are ignorant. And this ignorance stems from our desire to satisfy our body and mind. So what is I? What is this identity? What is us? This is I, this combination of body and mind we call the ego. So we know what ego is all about. In Buddhism, the Buddha talked about ego. And by now, if you're a first-time comer, you know that Buddhism is not about blind faith. Buddhism is to analyze your life. Buddhism is to understand yourself, how to deal with the society, how to deal with the relationship between you and the society and among other members of the family, interpersonal relationship. Buddhism is more analytical than a faith. So this combination of body and mind, we call it the ego. And this ego is made up of what? It's made up of, in the Buddha's teaching, it says that it's made up of the 5 skandhas, or the 5 aggregates. And we know all about 5 aggregates. Anybody who don't know about the 5 aggregates, raise your hand if you don't know. The 5 aggregates. It's, remember the Heart Sutra? If you can contemplate that the 5 aggregates are empty, then you'll be free yourself from suffering. The 5 aggregates, you've got to know about what the 5 aggregates are. What are these 5 aggregates? Just very, very briefly. People here understand, most of you. What are the 5 aggregates? It's always good to recollect. It's always good to restructure your thinking so that whenever you contemplate on something, your mind will be reflective on what you're seeing. And what are the 5 aggregates? Matter, perception, conception, volition, and consciousness. And we study them in detail. Every one of these. For example, matter, the 5 aggregates, the first one is matter. Why do we list matter as the first one? Why don't we list perception, conception, volition, and consciousness to go forward earlier than matter? Why don't we list matter as the number one? Because matter is easier to understand. You can see matter. You can see anything that make up of molecules, atoms, protons, electrons, anything that has a form is matter. And material is matter. It's easy to see and sense and get in close contact with material, so why don't we analyze material first? So the first of the 5 aggregates is matter. And for example, matter is what? If it relates to your ego, matter is what? Your body. Your body is made up of matter. It's the physical body. We have a body. And the Buddha said, analyze your body. Who is this body? Is this body you? Is this body representing you? If we talk about this matter, the physical body, if this body is you, how come when you die you can't take it with you? How come when you die your body die? If that body is you, you must be in control of your own possession, right? How come when you die your body disintegrates, it doesn't exist anymore? So your body is not you. It's a temporary you, it's a fleeting you. And as I said before, we're not going to analyze it in detail, otherwise it will be another lecture on the 5 aggregates. So the matter, your body. Are you not interested in your own body? Some people say, I'm only interested in other bodies, not my body. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? That's the problem. Isn't that a problem? That's what we call sensual pleasure. Well, anyway, matter is the physical body. So what is the other 5 aggregates? Perception, conception, volition, and consciousness. That belongs to the mental faculty of awareness. That means there's 2 things in you, body and mind, and that refers to the mind. Perception, conception, volition, and consciousness. Why do we list it like that? Because they seem to work more or less in sequence. Sometimes in sequence, sometimes simultaneously. When your eyes perceive something, after you perceive it, your eyes perceive. Just take your first sense organ, the eyes. Of course, you have the eyes, the nose, the ear, the tongue, the taste, all that sense organs. But let's just take the eye. When your eye sees something, your eyes perceive something, and then after you perceive it, you start to conceptualize it. Is it green, yellow? Is it round or square? Is it long, short? Is it ugly? Is it beautiful? You conceptualize it. After you conceptualize it, you also recall, and then you carry whatever you think into action, and that becomes volition. And all these actions coming from your behavior, your action, your speech, the language that you are speaking, the speech, and your thinking, it all stored in your consciousness. So that's why we say we have the body and mind. Now, that's it for the 5 aggregates. I'm not going to elaborate anymore because it takes a long time to elaborate on the 5 aggregates. And as a matter of fact, keep on contemplating on the 5 aggregates. The Heart Sutra said, when you perceive that the 5 aggregates are empty, you are free from suffering. And this perception is not just, with this perception of the 5 aggregates as empty, it's not just like an intellectual perception. It's just like reading a book, seeing a tape, watching a movie, that's intellectual. You think you have to get insight into it. You see the difference? Intellectual and literal meaning of something. Or if you're learning from a course, it's the pedagogical meaning or the pedantic meaning. No, we don't want that. That's easy. You read all the books in the world and you will be a Buddha? You collect millions of Buddhist books in your library and you bury yourself in all those books and you can become a Buddha? You think, no, there's no insight into it. That's just intellectual. That's just pedantic. That's just pedagogical, educational. You need direct insight. You need experience, direct experience into life. It does not matter how I tell you life is suffering. If you do not have direct insight and direct experience with suffering, you don't know what suffering is. Assuming that a person is born with no senses, or very little senses, he does not know what suffering is all about. It's like a plant. But we're not. So much for the 5 skandhas. I'm just emphasizing that you really need to analyze, recognize, understand what are these 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates, not just the words. We suffer, let me carry on. We suffer because we want to satisfy our body and mind, consciously or subconsciously, or unconsciously. We want to satisfy our body and mind. In what way? I already mentioned last time. Through our senses. Our eyes want to see the beautiful things. Our ears want to listen to dulcet sound, pleasant sound. Our tongue wants to taste the best taste. Our body wants the best tactile object to touch. Our mind always wants pleasant things, and you hate unpleasant things. All these are the satisfaction of sensory pleasures, and you recognize them as satisfaction? You think as long as you satisfy your senses, you're satisfied, you're happy? Do you define happiness in terms of satisfaction of your senses? If that is the case, I think something is wrong. Why? It's always the cases that your senses get you into trouble. When your ears listen to criticism, you start to yell out, "I didn't do that, shut up." Your ears don't want to listen to criticism. Your senses get you into trouble at least 50% of the time. You trust those senses that you have? Are they reliable? Why don't we step back and think about it? Don't always say mine, me, this is I, I see you, I hear you, I think about it, and this is my belief. And this belief's got to be right. You are infringing into my boundaries. This is my ego. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about the satisfaction of the ego, craving. We're talking about the 3rd Noble Truth. We already have identified cravings and mental afflictions. We're talking about how to seize it, how to stop all these things. But before we stop all these things, don't we have to know about them a little bit more? So the fundamental innate means born with. Afflictions include what? The afflictions, the mental afflictions that we have, that we are born with. What are those? Just to name a few. The fundamental ones. The fundamental ones, greediness, hatred, ignorance, arrogance. These are concomitant with the 7 consciousness, the manas consciousness, and have been carried over from previous lives. That means, what does that mean? First of all, you have to know what manas consciousness is, the 7 consciousness. I'm sure people here know there's 8 consciousnesses that we're talking about. These were the mental afflictions that were brought forward, carried over from previous lives. All these seeds, all this energy, all these mental afflictions, you carry them forward. You see, just for beginners, you may not know. You don't have just this life, You have a previous many, many lives. And if you don't get enlightened in this life, you're going to reincarnate in your next life. So time has 3 dimensions, not just the present. It has the past. Not just past talking about yesterday, or the day before, or the year before, or 10 years ago. Past, your past life. There is a past in the present. You know what I mean? There is a past in the present. In this present life, there is a past. You have a childhood, you have a teenager life, a middle-aged life, and if you're a senior now, you're looking back, I got a past, childhood, teenager. But that is a limited past. Your past went further in your previous life. Somebody sent me an email yesterday, and it said, it's interesting, you must see it, unbelievable. So I said, oh, okay, so I open it. You know what I see? I forgot the name of that show. It's a script from a show. It's a midnight show. And the midnight show, there was a gentleman, I forgot his name, a very famous midnight show, a round-faced fellow. What's his name? In New York. Huh?
Johnny Carson?
Huh?
Johnny Carson?
Not Johnny Carson. It's Johnny...
Jay Leno?
Something like that, yeah. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to you, I forget the name of that boy, a kindergarten boy. And he was able to play 200 pieces of music at the age of 6. Wow, I said, what? Is that unbelievable? So I click it on and, oh yes, and that boy came out and he was waving, 6-year-old waving, and how are you today, John? Well, I'm fine. And I know that your parents come from Russia. That's correct. He said, that's correct. And he's 6 years old. And how do you find California? It's great. He said, it's great. So have you been to the Disneyland? Oh, I love it, he said. It's like a mature person. But it's just a kindergarten, a six years old kindergarten. And then he said, oh, you play music, you play piano, yes. What happened? Did you learn? No, I said. He said, one day I was playing the kids' CD keyboard, and I play Mary Had a Little Lamb, and my mom and daddy didn't believe I was playing it. And then I play another one, and I play another one. I listened to those notes very carefully, and I remember those notes. So how many pieces of music can you play? I don't know. About 100 or 200. So what are you going to play for us? I'm going to play for you Bach and Beethoven and some of the pieces that I can remember. So he was led to the piano, and he was sitting in there, and he played 4 pieces of classical music. And he played from memory. He didn't play it because he was trained to do it. He played it, a 6-year-old, from memory. Why? He remembered what he did in his past lives. So that's just a digression of what I'm talking about. So it's a rebirth. So now you know. We don't have just this life. How do you explain that? Something got crazy in his mind? He's not crazy. That boy is intelligent. He remembered. Some people do. And as time goes on, he may forget. And okay, let's carry on without any digression. So there are also the conceptually arising afflictions, which are afflictions produced in this lifetime, such as self-view, extreme view, attachment to view of rigid attachment to precepts, evil view, greediness, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and doubt. So craving and attachment to craving produces mental afflictions, which in turn create karma, which in turn creates suffering. We are caught in the web of causality and the karma it produces. So we are caught in causality. You know what causality is? The law of causality, causes and effect. The fact that a molecule is here, moving, has a reason. The fact that you're here today has a reason. There are causes for it. It doesn't come without a reason. Nothing happened without a reason, without causes, without effects, without the chain of effects. Causality. That is a very important concept in the Buddhist teaching. You really have to know it. Causality, karma, rebirth, reincarnation, all these basic philosophy of Buddhism, you really got to know. That explains life. Okay, by letting go of craving and its attachment, we'll experience nirodha, which is the cessation of suffering. Letting go of craving. Do not crave anymore. No more greediness, no more hatred, no more jealousy, no more violence, no more anger. All of that go. Let them go. If you relinquish all these mental afflictions, all these passions, all these things that torture you, then you come to the cessation of suffering. Nobody torture you. It's you yourself. You think somebody's torturing you? Yes. That's just cause and effect. They're just contributing factors. But if you let go, they can't do anything to harm you. Can you let go? Extremely difficult. Before we can let desires go, we have to be mindful of them and understand their nature. Do you agree? Before you resolve your problems, don't you have to understand and realize those problems first? Identify them first? So before you let your desires go, before that, because letting your desires go would end suffering. That's what we said. That's the cessation of suffering. But before you let your desires go, don't you have to be mindful of what they are? Understand the nature? In other words, we have to admit them into our full consciousness first. You have to admit all these things in your full consciousness. Don't be afraid of them. In meditation, for example, we must be mindful of our suffering, such as despair, fear, anguish, suppression, lamentation, sorrow, and anger, and all this. We have to be aware of them in meditation. Not just in meditation, all the time. Meditation is not just cross-legged sitting in here, you know. I'm meditating now, I'm crossing my leg, crisscross my legs, and then I'm putting up a posture that Lee told me about this, about spine, about all that. That is in the training process. Meditation is all the time. 24 hours non-stop. Meditation is what? Be mindful of yourself. 24 hours. Always be mindful of yourself. So when you be mindful of yourself, when this despair, fears, anguish, suppression, lamentation, sorrow, when they come, for example, when you're meditating, okay, let's get an easy example. When you're meditating, and a thought of anger comes up in your mind. I hated that person because he abused me when I was a child. I hated him. I hated his guts. That's the thought comes up. Another thought comes up. I suffer because of what he has done to me. He disguised his love. I didn't like the divorce. Terrible husband. I hated him. I hated his guts. Another thought comes up. He's a hypocrite. Another thought comes up. I could not stand such humiliation. He disdained me. Another thought comes up. Are you going to let this thought torture you all the time? All these thoughts create suffering in your mind. Are you going to let them torture you? You let this thought continue? I got fired. This supervisor, I'm going to get even with him. He's stupid. I hated him. Every time when you think about that guy comes into your mind to torture you again. You allow him to torture you. Who is stupider, you or your supervisor? I don't know sometimes. I want to find out. I had a courtship with that lady. That lady, she was terrible. She slighted me. She disdained me. I shouldn't have seen that lady. Stupid! Who is torturing who? That lady is already married, is all gone. And you still think that he's single. So in other words, you allow your mental afflictions to arise. Yes? When they come to your mind, you allow them. Don't suppress them. That lady comes up again. The first time when I saw that lady, I liked that lady, but I know more. But she comes up again. Okay, let her come up. Let her come up. Here's the tea. Oh, you can drink your tea. I'm not getting involved. I'm not passionate about it. I let the thing come up. Let the thought comes up. Don't get carried away though. Watch the thought arises and let the thought cease. Let the thought subside. Don't get involved with it. Here it is, that supervisor is coming. I hated him. He came closer and closer to me. I'm not going to get close to him. I just watched him. I just say, I don't let you torture me anymore. I just smile. He couldn't do anything about it and he walks away. The thoughts subside. No more. I was abused as a child. Terrible abuse. I'm not going to let that abuse continue. Here comes the thought. It arises. But the Buddha said, anything that is subject to arising is also subject to ceasing. I don't want to stop the ceasing of it. I want to let it go. Let it go, let it go. It goes. Can you do that? Sounds simple. Allow them to cease. Allow them to end. Allow them to disappear. Allow them to go away. If you don't allow things to cease, you would create new karma and just reinforce your habits of attachment. You see, the problem is when something arises, we grasp it and proliferate it around it. And this brings us suffering. You would continue to be angry, jealous, anxious, fearful, insecure, and depressive. Here is the depression comes. I won't let it torture me. Hold on, I'm watching it. Why don't I just stick to my meditation and see you? I'm not going to shake hands with you though. You come, you come. You go, you go. I have nothing to do with you. You will become mindful. We become mindful of suffering so that they would not delude us anymore. We have to know what is diluting us before we can let it go. All this suffering arising from jealousy, hatred, arrogance, parsimony, negligence, restlessness, distraction, all these, they are impermanent. They are unsatisfactory and they are not self. They are not permanent. Are they permanent? They are not permanent. It's gone already. It's a historical experience. It's gone. It's not permanent. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is permanent. Just watch them and let them burn themselves off. If you can do it. So that's a cessation of suffering. Pedagogically, we say, I read a book about cessation of suffering. Cessation of suffering is to give up all your desire and that's it. Give up your anger, your hatred and all that. That's it. There's no insight into that. The insight is to get it when it comes to your mind. How do you deal with it? Not just by reading a book about cessation of suffering. Don't bury yourself with all the words. If by reading all the books of Buddhism you become a Buddha, the librarian is already a Buddha. Every day he's surrounded by all these books. He's the Buddha already. Or the publisher. He published billions of books every year. But the problem is he didn't read any of them. He's the boss. All the others read it. Anyway, it is important to differentiate between cessation and annihilation. Cessation of suffering and annihilation of suffering. It's important to differentiate the two words. Annihilation is a deliberate attempt. Annihilate it. Annihilation itself is a desire to get rid of things. But cessation is not. Cessation is different. It is a natural ending of any condition that has arisen. So it is not a desire. Do you desire to let it go? No, it's a cessation. It's a natural ending. But annihilation is a deliberate attempt to do it. It's a desire to do it. So cessation is not a desire. Cessation is not something that we create in our mind. But it is the end of that which arises. Because it says, whatever arises also ceases. So it's just a natural tendency. It has nothing to do with me forcing through a desire. It has nothing to do with my ego. Everything arises with cease. Does not matter whether it comes from my ego or not. My ego does not have that thing. Therefore, cessation is not self. It does not come from the ego. For example, I want to get rid of these things in my meditation. I want to get rid of this depression. I want to get rid of this arrogance. You don't have to do that. You don't have to annihilate it. If it comes, let it come. Let it go. Then when suffering is let go, you experience nirodha. And this nirodha is the cessation of suffering. It is emptiness and non-attachment. It is also another word for nirvana, the ending of rebirth and moral existence. It is also the voiding of the five aggregates. Naturally, when you have let go passions and allowed them to cease, what's left? What's left is peace. So letting go and acquiring, there's a difference to it. Cessation and annihilation, there's a difference to it. So this is something that you should understand. Well, if you still don't understand about letting go and acquisition, now let me tell you a story. A disciple asked Zen master Fa Rong, there was a Zen master Fa Rong, and a disciple asked him, Venerable, what teachings and ideas must one give up? And what teachings and ideas must one acquire before one could become a saint? That's a good question. What teachings and ideas must one give up? And what teachings and ideas must one acquire before one could become a saint? The Zen master replied, Oh, disciple, a saint doesn't have to give up any teachings or ideas, and doesn't have to acquire any teachings or ideas. And then the disciple asked, well, if a saint doesn't have to give up anything, and he doesn't have to acquire anything, what makes him different from the ordinary man? What makes him different? And the master replied, that's the difference. What's the difference? There are many things the ordinary man wants to give up, and there are many things that he hopes to acquire. But a man who realizes his mind is Buddha and his mind is enlightenment itself, he has nothing to give up, and he has no need to acquire anything. That's the difference. You see what I mean? There's nothing actually you give up, but when you go on, carry on and on. When you're used to it, there's nothing to give up. What is that suffering? That suffering has no real nature. What is the nature of that suffering? That suffering, or the experiences leading to that suffering, has no nature of itself. If you really want to identify a certain suffering that you have, somebody beat you up and you agonized on it afterwards. I lost my self-respect, I lost my esteem. What events are leading to that situation? There are so many constituents that lead up to that situation. And each one of these constituents, it's distinct. And all these things put together, so it happened in that way. But the whole event itself has no nature. It's empty. It's empty. It has no nature. And sometimes things happen, all these participants may not mean that way. It's just your way of looking at it. So it is not until we start meditating that we begin to realize how in our lives so much suffering sometimes so much suffering comes from childhood experiences. When you begin to feel memories or obsessive fears coming up in meditation, rather than becoming frustrated and upset by them, let them arise in your consciousness, don't suppress them, and let them go. Let them arise and let them go. You fail many, many times. And that failure haunts you all the time. All the time it is haunting you. When it's haunting you, you suffered. Are you going to let that suffering haunt you all the time? You let them go. Don't fall into this trap. Actually, there's no one trapping you. You yourself. You create your own booby trap to step on. Nobody else. You create your own loopholes and you step on it. So, don't attach to them. That's the cessation of suffering. You see, suffering is not just physical suffering, Just as the body suffers when it is in pain, the mind suffers when it is filled with mental afflictions. What I mentioned, hatred, arrogance, jealousy, depression, anxiety, disappointment, fear, and insecurity. All these things, these are the mental afflictions that bother your mind. When you are meditating, thoughts come up, for example, here comes a memory of abuse, here comes a memory of fear. Let them arise in your mind and let them come and let them go, and you contemplate with no passion of attachment, no anger, no retaliation, just watching them as if they are a third person. Don't even ask, why did they do this to me? It's grossly unfair. It is humiliating and painful. Why did they do this to me? It happened by causality. And causality finds its natural course. So don't try to ponder on the causes and effect either. They're empty and they're impermanent. In emptiness, things are just what they are. So do not grasp these things as personal faults and look for the laying of responsibility for these painful experiences. Don't say, oh, he should be responsible. It's not fair. Don't look for all these things. They're just torturing you. Don't look for them. It's gone and it's empty. Its constituents have no real nature. Conditions of impermanence, unsatisfactory, and non-self. They arise and they cease into emptiness. That's the cessation of suffering. Not just reading from a book, relinquishing your desire. Number 1 desire, number 2 desire, 3, 4, 5, list 25 desires, and if you cross them out, then you have cessation of suffering. That's intellectual. That's pedagogical, pedantic, like reading a book. You got to have direct experience, direct insight. So what does the Heart Sutra say on this? You remember? If you can't remember, I can quote for you in there. The Heart Sutra says, in emptiness, there is no form. Remember? In emptiness, there's no form, no perception, no conception, no volition, no consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind. Because in emptiness, there is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinction, no path, no wisdom, and also no attainment, because there is no object to be obtained. Why are you trying to obtain? It does not need any acquisition at all. What do you try to obtain? The more we contemplate and investigate grasping, the more the understanding of what letting go really means. It is not just a theoretical or intellectual meaning, letting go, but a close encounter with suffering, free of passions, without any attachment. It is a direct insight, a direct experience, close touch. It's just like you're talking to demon. You can't get away from demon unless you talk to him. When demon comes, you say, okay, let's have a take. Let's have a coffee break. Come, demon, let's talk about it. You're giving this to me. I'm not giving any passion onto it. You come, okay, you come. I'm not going to get into a trap again. You go. You have close encounter with demon. You're not afraid of it. You don't get carried away by it. You have direct insight about it. That is the cessation of suffering. That's the cessation of suffering. And I would like to end it at that, because next time we will talk about the fourth noble truth. What's the fourth noble truth? The method that will help you to end suffering. For those who really need a method. For those who think that you have something to acquire, you have something to get rid of, you still need a method. So every item of the Four Noble Truths, if you have direct insight, just for understanding one, you would know all the others. It's not a linear scale understanding. You have to understand number one first Noble Truth, and then you understand second, again third, and then fourth. You don't go in sequence like that. It's not a linear scale, a linear correlationship. Boom! You understand one thing, you understand it all. You don't need to go one step by step. But the Buddha said if you need step by step, here's the step by step. Number one is suffering. You've got to recognize suffering. Number two, identify the causes of suffering. Number three, that the suffering can be ended. Number four, here are the methods. The 8 Noble Truths. Follow these 8 methods. For those who can't open their mind immediately, these are mind openers. They are still good. They are still good. But what do we mean by abrupt enlightenment? Direct insight. Now you know the difference between gradual enlightenment and immediate enlightenment. How can people get enlightened out of a meditation, a glimpse of enlightenment? He's got a abrupt, immediate enlightenment without going through all these pedagogical, pedantic approaches. He got it. If I go to Whistler, I drive. Probably take me about 2 hours. If I have a helicopter, no. Maybe half an hour or less. It's a shortcut. But you know that a helicopter is quite different from a car. Much more advanced. If you really have to go by step, assuming that you're a little worm inside bamboo, and right at the top end of the bamboo, assuming that is the heaven that worm is going to go to, he's aspiring to go to that heaven. And he has to bite through all these sections of the bamboo Every bamboo has little sections on it and has to bite through that step by step until it reaches to heaven and say, this is heaven, I got to heaven. But here's another worm. He says, I'm not going to go step by step. I'm going to bite a hole horizontally and I get out. It depends on your previous life, whether you have the energy, whether you have the seeds, that you have already cultivated seeds of wisdom that would allow you to sprout all these flowers. Everyone is different. So that's why we have to plant seeds. Today, does not matter who you are, whether you come for the first time, second time, or third time, the seed of enlightenment is planted in you, in your consciousness. You could have come for the first time, it does not matter. That seed telling you that, hey, don't just look at material. That is that spiritual odyssey, the spirituality that you should look at. Here is a seed planted in you. That thing is hit in the keyboard. In the keyboard of your mind, it gets into the memory of your mind. It's not erasable. It's stored. That memory is unlimited. And we call it the alaya consciousness. That memory is as extensive as the universe. That memory carries 3 dimensions. All your previous life, this present life, and if you're not going to be enlightened in this life, you're going to the next. So we've been talking for the past hour. We haven't been talking about Creator. We haven't been talking about prostration, leading down to Buddha, getting blessings from Buddha. We're talking about life, your mind, yourself. Not about Buddha, not about faith, not about chanting. It's you yourself. Are you going to understand yourself? Do you know what Buddhism is all about? Buddhism is not a faith, you know. It's not a blind faith. It's about yourself. Are you interested in yourself? If you are, see you next time.